The other point I wanted to make was going back to something I think we discussed a few months ago about whether Ned should visit with executives or not. And I must say I still feel a little bit uneasy about the idea of doing these visits necessarily with an executive member of the board. Because I think the feedback you get and the discussion you had is quite different.
Yes.
So we want to have a mix, in other words, and we certainly do not want to discourage non-execs from visiting without a minder.
Exactly so.
I know that that's not what the execs are there for, but I think that there is a point to be made about the difference in character of the meetings. Renette, well, I'm going to come back to Louise in a second.
Sorry, I didn't want to jump the queue, but I've heard when we've had feedback from non-execs when they've been to sites, from the engagement that the Neds have expressed, that they have. It's been universal that you've felt that the staff are as open with you as they possibly can be. So I don't know how much more open you think that the staff might be without you being there, as it were. So that's my first point. But the other thing is the logistics of people turning up without other people around. Is that it then puts all the burden of responsibility on the local staff who to make all the arrangements, and I just about get away with it myself, of being allowed to go to site without people wanting to fuss around me, and I know that it does put everyone in a heightened state of alert when we've got non-execs coming, in terms of they say that they want to make you welcome and give you the proper experience of meeting the staff and listening to the calls, but that's obviously taking them away from doing what they would normally be doing that day. So I'd just balance those two things of, I hope we don't feel like minders to you. Steve hasn't had me as a minder yet, but he will.
We will. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I want to go back to Louisa and then Sue.
I was actually going to raise the issue around the Neds with execs, and actually we felt it worked quite well going together, because we felt that it felt a bit more sort of natural in a way, that it wasn't just one person and all the focus on that one person. But I think we also were mindful that there were a lot of people giving up their time to sit with us. But actually, I wonder if the quality of the conversation is different, simply because I suppose we feel more able to share our sort of ignorance, and it's a genuinely sort of feels like a genuine virgin territory when you're discussing some of these things. And the other thing, it would be nice to see a sort of have an idea of which sites are most visited, and you've done that for me actually, but just so generally, so there's not some poor site that no one ever sort of goes to. And I suppose one of the things would be that you hit the ones that have got the high sickness levels, and which might be a helpful thing to do.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things we were hoping to do, was try and not impose some mechanistic requirement that every site gets a visit, but to be aware of the distribution of visits. So we should do that. I'm not quite sure how we do that, but maybe at some point in the year we should probably sit back and say, well, what's the pattern of visits been like, and what have we learned, and is there, rather than, or in addition to the individual I was here and this is something interesting I found out. So maybe that's something we could build into the Go Listen, which is an annual sort of informal but slightly broader stock take of the way that the non-exec and exec visits have fallen out during the year. Can we do that?
Yeah, yes.
Great. Yeah, go on. And then we'll go to Sue.
And I think it would be nice for us to know whether it was at all helpful us going, because I think we have a sense of what we ought to get out of it, but it's important to, what to get out of it.
Okay.
Just wondering, just react to that.
Yes.
No,
if Sue will let you.
No,
please do.
I just think that's very difficult to get proper evaluation. I think part of it is doing it and being seen to do it and have a reason to do it. The feedback part, I mean, I was quite interested. I mean, I went, and they might have been disappointed because I didn't shuffle off and have a private meeting with them at the time. I don't know if they were disappointed, but I didn't. I haven't had any feedback. But anyway, I just thought that's quite a difficult area, I think, to get feedback.
Yeah.
You said, I suppose, if there are quite a few people there at Bone and Health, and if they felt, well, that was a bit of a waste of time, wasn't it? Or they didn't seem to know very much, or that would be quite helpful to know.
Okay. Well, let's see how we can do that. Sue.
I'm just thinking about what happened with Nick and I when we went up to Nottingham, because it sort of partly addresses this. We had a whole room of people, and if we'd done that all individually, but given everybody the chance to speak individually, it would have been virtually impossible to get round everybody. So actually what Nick suggested was we split the room, and half went to talk to Nick and half came and talked to me. And actually I think that's actually pretty pragmatic solution to what we're talking about here, because if there's anyone that really desperately wanted to get into my group, I'm sure they could have done, and vice versa. I think the interesting thing is, from my perspective, is that when Nick and I then discussed it afterwards, the issues actually seemed to be very similar. Yeah. What was raised with Nick was actually very similar to what was raised with me, and I certainly didn't get any sense that people weren't feeling they were being prohibited in actually speaking their mind. So I actually think you can achieve the separate conversations if that's what people want within the same visit, and minimise the disruption then to the organisation. That was number one. Number two, it's from a clinical governance perspective. For me, this is very important that we do all of these things, because I think they're important in responding to what happened in Francis. Can I just highlight one, which is this observation for incidents for national review. I personally think it is extremely important that all of the NEDs, at some point in the year, maybe once or twice in the year, actually just listen in to the peer reviews for serious incidents. You're not expected to contribute in any way, in fact, far from it. It's about each of the NEDs understanding the process and coming to a view about the rigour or otherwise of the process that we adopt. Also, it helps you to engage with one or two specific, the substance of one or two specific incidents. And I think it's this point, Trevor, about whether we should be doing it or whether people should be coming to us. What gets circulated every month, I believe, to everybody, is the list of incidents and an open invitation for any one of us to join those calls. I suppose it would be just a plea from my perspective that you do one or two in a year. I think if you end up doing too many, then law of diminishing returns. But I think that would be, of all of these, something that I think would be valuable for everybody to do.
Okay, so I've seen Roger's hand, Trish's hand, Renette's hand. I mean, I would just like to say quickly, I think that's something that I think is extremely sensible, and it's something that I will then talk to people about in the annual discussions that we have one-on-one with NEDs about have they done it and what have they learned from that, because that's something that I think is easy to do. But to be clear, then that's the non-executive's responsibility. They receive the list, they can find ones that suit them, and they can join them.
My point was linked to, because I don't think it's just the NEDs.
No. Okay.
I think it's the board as a whole.
Absolutely.
Obviously, Trish, Helen and I probably do more than others, but I think that all of us on the board have got equal responsibility to do this. And listen to, I think all of these actions here, I think, are equally apparent to us executive directors as they are to non-exec directors as well.
Good point, thank you. Ruth, then Trish.
Roger,
sorry. There's too many people sitting next to each other with the same initials.
I just wanted to ask Trish, you may not have the answer to this, Trish, so we could perhaps pick it up outside, but one of the elements of this is talking about senior managers as well as execs and non-execs.
And that's Ronette's point, is for other members of the board and senior managers, this is not just executive.
I mean, in my HR restructure, I've been focusing my teams on the service and to get out of their bunkers into the service and help manage the service. And I just wondered what, out of the list, what the quick wins for senior managers like those people might be. I mean, we can pick it up outside, but I do think that's a really important part of this.
Okay, well, I'm glad you raised it. I think it's useful for the board to know that you're thinking along those lines, and the board will support you, and maybe you can go and discuss the detail.
Okay. Thank you.
My final point was to add to Annette's point about it being senior managers and the other executives, but the non-execs that have reviewed or attended the reviews and gave us some feedback, the other staff who participate in the review have really had a heightened sense of this is the board paying attention to the incident, and this is not just a process and tram tracks that we are on and nobody is paying attention. It's been fed back to us. It's great to have the non-execs, it's great to have the 360-degree feedback that we get from their participation fed back to the teams out actually in the sites.
Good, thank you. Well, then I think we are coming to the end of this item. We should then go on to talk about the specific call that was circulated. So before we do that, it seems to me, Trish, that you've had a lot of strong support for the broad thrust of this, and that then requires a set of actions for you and us to get things going. And let's look back at this in a few months' time and see whether we think that it's working. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we had a specific call recording distributed to us. So the first thing I'd like to do is a quick show of hands around the table. Could you stick your hand up if you've had an opportunity to listen to the call?
Yes.
Okay, good. So most people have done that. That's great. There was also a paper that went round with it, which provided the context. It was an unusual one. Does anybody have any particular comments or thoughts they'd like to share about that specific recording? Steve?
One was really to ask Tricia and you, and again, I understand that you have to have a bar at certain levels before you escalate it.
Yes.
It just surprised me a little bit that a 95-year-old lady with breathing problems, it was a 4-hour call. That just surprised me, but I've no idea of the algorithms that you use in order to substantiate that.
We have learnt, certainly from our investigation of our deaths over the last 6 months, throughout that review, we've identified that there are particular trends within the review of patient deaths of the last 6 months, and one of those trends was carers from residential homes, particularly where a relative who is ringing on behalf of a child or a partner will express in their tone and pitch and the level of anxiety and the seriousness of the patient's condition, that often is left out, and there isn't the same emotion attached to a call when it is made by a carer from a nursing home. Not always, and certainly I believe in this case, this carer was particularly expressing a level of concern. They'd identified that since the GP had been earlier that day, the patient had made some considerable deterioration, and I think in this particular incident that perhaps wasn't picked up by this particular health advisor. But we have learnt through our review that carers often don't express in the way that other family members would do the level of urgency, and you would have if that had been the case in this call, I do think it would have been a warm transfer to a nurse or particular clarification of what the carer wanted, which is, do you want this call to be going through to the GP, because evidently that is the action they took immediately after the call, or passed it directly to a nurse, and that's what I would have expected from this particular call.
Louisa, then Tim.
Yeah, and I thought that it was interesting because when I listened to the call, the actual emphasis on this being an issue around carers didn't marry up with the call that I'd heard, and I'm sure there is an issue around carers, and a couple of things concerned me. In that listening to it, you hear this is a woman with breathing problems and Rigels, and so it felt rather chilling that it was a 4-hour callback. And also the thing that I found particularly concerning was that in the conversation, the carer clearly said, well, yes, she is breathing more rapidly. But then the same question was asked again, her breathing's okay, to which the carer said yes. So the question was asked once and was asked in a very sort of closed way, and that concerned me, that there was almost no process going on in terms of thinking about what was happening in that conversation. So I think that that clearly in this situation the outcome would not have been changed, but it makes you wonder how often that happens in calls, which is why I think that 1% call review is just absolutely essential.